Hi, everybody. It's great to be back with you and talk a little more about conservation, the power of story. So thank you so much for watching the recording, and also thank you for your questions. There were so many great questions that I received, and I'm excited to talk to you about your questions and answer a few of them. So one of the questions I heard a lot was, how many different species of plants do you have in your home garden? How long did it take you to make it? That Osama asked that, and then there were a lot of other questions about the garden as well. I'm so happy to hear that, because a lot of us think of nature as this great big place that's somewhere else. And really, it can be as close as growing something in a pot on your windowsill if you don't have a yard, as putting out a little container with some flowers for butterflies or insects. You don't have to have a big yard to have a big garden. I used to garden in Indiana. I lived in rural Indiana, and I had 3 acres where I had 16 raised beds of vegetables, and I had apple trees, and I had gooseberries and blueberries and all kinds of stuff. And to me, that was gardening, right? But when we moved to the Chicago region and our realtor told us our house had a big yard, I laughed, because it's a very tiny suburban garden area, not very far from College of DuPage. And our yard, when we moved in, had absolutely nothing but grass and a few of the landscape shrubs, kind of like arborvitae. That was a really popular one, in juniper. I took some of those shrubs out. I left, you can see if you look up in the corner of the screen, there's a big arborvitae. That's the only one left of about 6 of them that we had that were giant, because they had kind of outlived their usefulness in the yard. So pretty much we started with lawn, and I would say we have just about 100 species of plants now on probably maybe 1/8 of an acre of land. And we're surrounded on, as you can see, this is the neighbor's shed. Back here is a neighbor's yard. So we're very tight as far as having people on all sides. So to grow what I would call a more native, a more loose, a more natural garden, also you have to think about the neighbors. So fortunately, my neighbors behind me are very supportive of natural landscaping. And then I have neighbors on both sides who are very friendly to the idea, even though they don't practice it themselves. So I have a lot of support in the neighborhood, and I'm grateful for that. One of the things I've done to make it more friendly is to sign it with mostly butterfly signs that tell people that we're growing things for butterflies, because butterflies are great ambassadors for the natural world. People may not understand the grasses, and the kind of the loose assortment of plants, but they do understand butterflies, and they like butterflies, they like birds. So it really helps when you can show them that you're doing this intentionally, and it's not, just a bunch of weeds. It took us 23 years. We've lived here 23 years now. So this, I would say, growing a prairie in your backyard, which if you can look to the left, you would see we have prairie all along the back strip. That is not the work of instant gratification. That is the work of years of planning, and also, trying new things, having things that go away, having new plants that come in that you didn't plant. So it's definitely, I would say, a process. It's never really finished. So 23 years from pretty much lawn to what we have now. And it's been a really exciting adventure. And whether you're just growing a few things in a plant or contain, like in a plant pot or container, or if you have several acres years and want to do something really big, it's very, very satisfying to make a difference in a little way, in a big way, wherever you find yourself and wherever you go. I hope you'll all consider doing that, whether you're a student, whether you're a community member. Think about how you can make a difference. And if you don't even have a windowsill, then think about making a difference in your community. You can work on gardens in your community. You can help the places where you live have some native plant installations. So another great question. Osama was one of the people who asked the question about the garden. Amber had some questions as well. And Amber asked, aside from just being therapeutic, how did the natural world help me during my cancer journey? And she wondered, is it just mental health or was there some physical relief? And that was a great question. I didn't talk about the cancer journey a lot in the video, but if you look at my book, Chasing Dragonflies, there's a lot more details in there about that. I think the journey of the body and the journey of the natural world are really intertwined. I write a blog every week called Tuesdays in the Tall Grass. And the subtitle of the blog is Exploring Interior Landscapes and Exterior Landscapes. So the two are very connected. What's going on inside you and your body and your mind, and what's going on in the natural world. What I found was at the beginning of my cancer journey, I was told I was not supposed to walk for more than 10 minutes at a time. And for someone who pretty much walks as part of my living and teaching, field classes, and then also walks for, I would say, stress relief. I mean, this was a pretty big deal. And some of you will understand what I'm saying because you probably go out and hike and walk and find that as well. So what I had to do was pull on that reservoir of memories and experiences that I had built up. I have a well inside me of in that interior landscape that is compiled of all of that time I've spent outdoors, whether in my garden or on the prairie or chasing dragonflies. And it was those memories that I called on when I sat on my back porch or laid on the couch that were sustaining. So in a sense, removed maybe a step from, let's say, those bigger places of nature that I walked, and drawing on the reservoir of those walks that I had built up. And spiritually, I would say I feel I would call myself a very spiritual person, in that I feel very close to God, or if you want to say something bigger than yourself, when I am outdoors. So that was also, spiritually, again, feeling that remove and having to draw on those memories, those visceral memories, somewhat of walking, and the mental memories too. So spiritually, I would say the natural world was in that way helpful in my recovery. Mentally, if I could sit on my back porch and just look outside, watch the sky. The sky is an ever-changing kaleidoscope. I mean, it's amazing. You should watch it today as we're taping this. I mean, the sky is just incredible. So I could sit and watch the sky. I could listen to the birds. I could feel the breeze on my face. So even just sitting was a relief, I think, physically, and helped me in my recovery. Both interior landscape, that well of memories, and then being outside, whether it was walking for 10 minutes, 5 minutes up the block and then 5 minutes back, or sitting on my back porch. Those were all very helpful in all the dimensions of recovery that we need. Amber also asked a question, how or what events in my life caused me to become an environmental steward and naturalist? Really nice question. Thank you, Amber. So I was fortunate enough to grow up with both a big backyard. I grew up just outside of Indianapolis in Indiana. We had a yard that had been, it was in the suburbs, and it was fenced. And the people who had lived in the house before my parents bought it were gardeners. And so every kind of fruit tree, every kind of bush, anything you see in a garden catalog, they had ordered and planted. And even though it wasn't it was a big yard for the suburbs, but it was surrounded with trees and flowers and all kinds of plants. And me and my younger brother and sister spent pretty much from dawn to dusk in the summertime outside. We were riding our bikes. We were playing in the backyard. I write in my first book, Waiting for Morning, about some of those times I remember playing in the backyard under a forsythia bush or climbing trees. Those early experiences, I think, really did shape me as an environmental steward and naturalist. I had a grandmother who was a science teacher. She gifted me with rock tumblers and microscopes and all kinds of accoutrements that now I try to get for my grandkids, because those tools she gave me helped me explore the natural world. And I've always loved communication. I've always loved writing. I've always loved art. I started my college days as an art major and finished as an art minor and a journalism major. So I think once you fall in love with the natural world, you want to share it with other people. Mary Oliver's quote, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. I really feel like that's been my mantra, at least for the last 30 years. So great question. And I would say the women in my life, my mother loves the outdoors. She became a master naturalist in her late 70s. And my mom encouraged us to get muddy, to get dirty, to explore. She gave us a lot of room. She didn't micromanage our time as kids. She gave us a lot of room to go out and experience these things for ourselves. So thank you, Mom. And thank you to my grandma, Paige. Both of them, I think, seriously shaped the way I view the world today and had a lasting impact on my love for the outdoors. Strong women in my life. Michael asked, what is the best way to establish biodiversity when you're gardening? So I love that question. I chose this slide for it because I have a button bush that's sitting on my back porch. It needs to go in the ground, right? It's gotten, I've been traveling this week and it got cold while I was gone. And I'm like, I've got to get this in the ground. But the button bush is a great example. I bought it from a Possibility Place nursery down in Will County. And it's a shrub. And when I started gardening, I wasn't thinking so much about shrubs, but I've been thinking, this has been the year of the shrub for me. What we know about plants is that they're not just singular, they're not removed from everything else. A plant has all these associates. In this case, you can see the butterfly on the button bush. And when we put a plant in the ground, it's important to think holistically about what we're doing. What plants are, or what animals maybe are going to eat the seeds, what birds are going to use the plant for shelter, what caterpillars, as Doug Tallamy has so beautifully illustrated in his books and talks, what caterpillars are going to use this plant, what insects need it for life. So it is a piece of the puzzle, or you could say a part of the cycle of nature that this plant has a role to play. So whenever you choose, Michael, a plant for biodiversity when you're gardening, if you think holistically, like what role is this plant going to play in the bigger world, you're off to a good start, I would say. I strive. Doug Tallamy talks a lot about biodiversity. If you haven't checked out his wonderful books, please do, or his talks. But I've kind of followed his recommendation where you try to have 70% of the plants in your yard as native to the place where you live. So for me, that's DuPage County in Illinois. And then 30% might be, we'll call them other plants. So you've got some lawn. I have a real passion for zinnias, which are native to Mexico, but I love them. The butterflies like them. They're great nectar sources for hummingbirds. So I have a lot of those in my yard. You might have some plants that you're very sentimental about. Some of us had grandmothers who had peonies or peonies, however you call it regionally. Maybe we want one of those, or maybe when a relative passed, we transplanted some tulip bulbs or daffodil bulbs, which aren't native to our area, but they were part of our childhood. So we bring them into our yard. And I think there's a place for that. But if you always think about the bigger picture, what is this plant going to do? How is it going to function in the place where I find myself right now? You can't go too wrong, Michael. It's a great question. Then we had, moving from butterflies, we had a question from Miriam about dragonfly migration. And here's our green darner. This is the one you've probably been watching in the fall, move in big groups to the south. And she wondered, what are the possible reasons for dragonfly migration? Is it related to weather? What an excellent question. And I was so glad you asked that. There is a chapter in my book, Chasing Dragonflies, which is all about migration, because it is a big topic. We know dragonfly migrations have been observed everywhere except Antarctica. So every continent except Antarctica. And some of them, like the wandering gliders, which is the gold one that you see flying around this time of year, can make spectacular, like thousands of miles across ocean flights. And I think the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership, which is part of the Xerxes Society, check them out if you want to follow up more on migration. Again, it's the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership. You can Google it. But they note that dragonfly migrations are twice as far as monarch butterfly migrations. So think about it. I mean, the monarchs have great publicity agents. Everybody knows monarchs and their migrations. Not too many people know a lot about dragonfly migration. And Dennis Paulson, I want to show you his book here. He is probably our foremost expert on dragonflies. He has this lovely book called Dragonflies and Damselflies, A Natural History, and was very kind enough to read Chasing Dragonflies in its raw form and make some excellent suggestions for me on improving the book. So I owe him an eternal debt of gratitude. But he says in the book, this is our expert, right? He says, dragonfly migration is still poorly understood. So here's our expert, and he's saying, we really don't understand a lot about it. Why is that? So with monarchs, we can tag them, right? You raise them, you tag them, you catch them in the garden, you tag them, and then they can recover the tags because they all go from the Midwest anyway. They all go down to this special place in Mexico. But dragonflies, there's really no success in tagging them individually or recovering tags. Dennis notes in his book that they did try experiments where they tagged them with radio transmitters. Can you imagine this little dragonfly? I mean, it's big for a dragonfly, but carrying around a radio transmitter. And they were able to see that they were kind of heading south, kind of using the same strategies with wind and temperature. that birds use. So they found that similarity. Indeed, we know they kind of, sometimes you'll see them flying under big flocks of migrating birds. But we don't know a lot about them. We do know here in the Chicago region, there seems to be a population of local green darners. We'll just take green darners for the sake of narrowing it down here, and a breeding population of migratory ones. So we also can look at the isotopes in the wings. So you can go down to the Gulf Coast or wherever, and scientists can look at the isotopes in the wings of the dragonfly and see where their natal waters are, where they emerged from. It's important too, we've got about 18 species in North America that we think may be migratory, and probably 9 that are regular migrants. Here in Illinois, maybe I would say 5 or 6, and we could look at those as the green darner, the black saddlebags, the variegated meadowhawk, and the wandering glider. And then there are other ones too, but those would be probably the big ones. Which species are truly migrating and which ones, there's also something called dispersal. That would be more like, and again, it's so poorly understood, and I am not a dragonfly migration expert by any means, but they may be dispersing for feeding reasons. We don't really know. So if you want to get a doctoral degree, if you don't have yours in something, dragonfly migration would be a great place to do it, because we are learning a lot about that. She also asked, about the weather relationship, and we know that temperature drop at night may possibly have something to do with it. It may have something to do with the emerging, and I'm really going out on a limb here, with the emergence of that migratory population. There's just a lot we don't know. So great question. Follow the Dragonfly Migratory Partnership with Xerxes, and you can keep up on the latest developments with that. But it's a fascinating topic, so much to learn for all of us. Then a great question from Nicholas. What kind of plants do you have in your pond? And have you ever found dragonfly or damselfly nymphs there? So I have not found the nymphs, and I have been looking, and I expect to find them. I think that is more a function of the fact that nymph ID and finding and identifying nymphs is pretty new to me as a dragonfly person. I just took Marla Garrison's excellent course at the Morton Arboretum called Advanced Dragonfly ID. Marla was very helpful to me with the Chasing Dragonfly books. I owe her a huge debt of gratitude because she read the whole manuscript, as Dennis Paulson did, made excellent suggestions, and really tutored me in nymphs and how important it was to learn about the nymphs on a site. So this is something I'm trying to do right now. I was just out at Nachusa about 2 weeks ago with the wonderful Dr. Elizabeth Bach, and we were in a stream kind of panning for nymphs and trying to look for dragonfly and damselfly nymphs, without a lot of success that day. So this is something that I have a lot to learn about. But in the pond, to have a pond like this, I feel pretty certain that I do have the nymphs, because I've seen some really great species there. I've been looking for the exuvias that shed exoskeleton as well. The plants I have, I pulled this picture for you. This is marsh marigold, and you can see also some of the iris, some native iris. I have a blue flag iris. I have some iris I kind of wish I didn't plant too early on in establishing that pond almost 20 years ago. I have some sweet flag iris, which I later learned is a little bit invasive. So, you know, the pond is kind of in process, just like the garden is. Some of the other plants that you'd see here as the season progresses would be the great blue lobelia, lobelia syphilitica. And that's a great one for hummingbirds and for butterflies. And then also the cardinal flower we talked about during that first program. That's the bright red one. That's the color of lipstick. And those are both really wonderful attractants for hummingbirds and also for butterflies and bees, native bees as well. So thank you for asking that question. I'm still adding and subtracting ponds or plants from my pond. I've lost some things that I've planted in there, and putting a pond in your yard is just one of the best things you can do. It is amazing what comes, and it really is cool for dragonflies as well. Then Shiraz asked a question about big bluestem, and this is a great season to go outside on the COD prairie or on out at Benedictine at the prairies close to there, and look for big bluestem. So big bluestem is, of course, Illinois state grass. And we talked a little bit about some of the medicinal and cultural uses for that plant in the first program. And Shiraz wanted to know, has anyone actually started experimenting with the biomass of the big bluestem? Since I had mentioned it could be a fuel alternative. And yes, they have. One of the papers I pulled up, and if you Google this too, you can find out, you know, what's going on in real time. But right now, there's a great paper called "A Big Bluestem as a Bioenergy Crop," and it's by Zhang, Johnson, Prasad, Pai, and Wang. And this was from 2015, where I thought they did, it's an amazing study. And they reviewed big bluestem from different places. So they were looking at local genotypes, both in Illinois, in Missouri, down to Arkansas, up to North Dakota, and kind of summarize all those different ecotypes. And then looked at its potential. And what they found was that, yes, it's very promising for ethanol production and bio oil, but in order to really work well, there's going to have to be a lot of plant breeding research that focuses on modifying a big bluestem in a certain way that helps increase its biomass yield. So take a look at that study. And again, it's called Big Bluestem as a Bioenergy Crop. You can find it on Semantic Scholar if you use that site. And I believe it was originally published in Elsevier. It's Elsevier. You can look there, and it's in their renewable and sustainable energy reviews. So yeah, great question. Switchgrass gets a lot of attention as a biofuel. It's probably the one that you get the most press on. It's kind of like the monarch butterfly, right? It's the grass that gets a lot of good press for biofuel. But big bluestem is certainly one of those promising ones. And some farmers too in the Central Plains especially like big bluestem better, because switchgrass can tend to get pretty rambunctious, and if you're trying to contain it or whatever, big bluestem is a little bit more well behaved. How's that? And then the last question, or last questions, there's two here. These are from, I believe it's Tahara. And the question is, how did you get so interested in nature and why? And I would go back again to, if you look here, this Waiting for Morning book really has a lot of stories about that, especially about growing up, that big backyard I was talking about, my mother, my mother's mother, who was a science teacher, and then my father's mother in a different way. my other grandmother showed her love through food. So she was always, letting us make messes in the kitchen and bake and, cook things up. And she was an award-winning cook. So she wasn't so much of an outdoors grandma, but she did have a cool backyard with a super tall persimmon tree. It's a really cool fruit, and not the Asian persimmon, but the local persimmon here we have in Illinois, little small golf ball size orange fruit. And then she had a lot of great places to hide. She had a lot of shrubs, a lot of trees. So we spent a lot of time in her backyard as well growing up. And when she passed away, I have some of the plants from her garden in my backyard as well. And that's a nice touchstone, I think, with people who have made a difference in our lives. And then Tahara also asked, do you wish to expand your interest in other ways, such as building exhibitions or museums? Wow, great question. I think for all of us who love the natural world and want to share it with people, we're always thinking about what the next thing is. So one of the delights of sharing the natural world for me has been to work at the Morton Arboretum. Back in, I think, 2015, I worked on their staff with exhibits and with those little signs you see as you walk around the trails that tell you what you're looking at. We call them interpretive panels. And I loved doing that. And I love the interpretive panel work because you were communicating about the natural world with people you would maybe never meet face to face, but it was still a new way, a different way to share stories with them, to share the stories that were so important. So I really loved doing that. And of course, I dream of someday working to establish a museum for or a center for the tallgrass prairie. I think of it as a place for literature, as a place for art, all these wonderful people that are working in tallgrass places, and interpreting them through textiles, they're interpreting them through metalwork, interpreting them through literature, bringing all those things together into one exhibit. So I would say that's probably my dream. Thank you for asking. And just as to close, I guess, as thinking about all these questions you've asked me, I hope that when you think about ways to get in touch with nature and to learn the stories and listen to the stories that nature and the natural world are telling you, you'll keep that sense of wonder. You'll keep that sense of excitement and curiosity. So I wanted to read to you just a little bit from the Tallgrass Prairie. This is called Tallgrass Conversations in Search of the Prairie Spirit with Thomas Dean, my co-author. And I had a chapter called Wonder. One of my favorite nature writers, Sigurd Olsen, wrote, "While we are born with curiosity and wonder, and our early years full of the adventures they bring, I know such inherent joys are often lost." And then he says, "I also know that deep within us, that latent glow that we had since childhood, right, can be fanned into flame again by awareness and an open mind." So how do we fan the flame? How do we stay aware and keep that open mind? It's very easy to become insular. And I think the answer is time outdoors. Perhaps that's always the answer. Even a short walk in an Illinois winter is a mental palate cleanser. It sweeps everything clean. It gives you a chance to clear your mind, to keep that open mind, and it can help fan that sense of wonder and curiosity. So I hope you'll consider going out and taking a walk after listening to this. I hope you'll remember to tell the stories about what you observe there. I love to go back to Robert McKee's quote, storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world. You are all storytellers. So please go out, find those stories and put those stories of the natural world out there. Thank you for your questions and thank you for letting me celebrate with all of you at Benedictine.